All right. Why don't we start with the bracha? Can everybody see the screen here and the blessing?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu so divrei Torah. Okay, so here's the opening question. Where do you turn for comfort when the sight of good people suffering and evil people not being held to account overwhelms you with despair? I don't know if you all have that. I took it off the screen so we could kind of talk together. Anybody need to hear that question again? Claudia, are you saying something? You're on mute. No, you're just.
No, I'm muttering to myself.
You're muttering.
I was, the word, I was starting to circle around the word comfort and trying to feel into that. And, comfort, it's like, So I was trying out different things in my head, but it's as good as any other, but there's some others.
What to say that again? What's as good as any other? Comfort as
Sorry,
a word?
the word comfort is as good as any other about what I'm speaking. It's not a word I've used before, so I was having to feel into comfort, reassurance,
respite,
going against terror. I'm in a terror state some of the time. So where do I go? All right, so I'll think about it.
Does nobody have a happy place these days? I know it feels that way. Yes, go ahead, Annette.
Probably the two places I go are music and nature.
Music and nature. And is it listening to music?
Not necessarily together.
Do you play music or listen to it?
No, listen, no, the musical talent in my family skipped me, unfortunately.
Okay, music and nature. Those are two tried and true retreats. Anyone else?
Maybe to
Yes,
do
Merle, go ahead.
The truth is, when I see evil people prosper, I don't get comfort, but I often confirm with people who also will be sharing that same horror.
So you talk to people who have the same despair you do?
Yeah, and I see, when I saw Trump win, which is, and Hillary lose, the indignation that I felt, I couldn't get comfort, but at least I knew I wasn't nuts because many people that I respected were in the same place.
Right.
We did that at HPT that Wednesday night. We met and a number of people said this feels like a Shiva call, and it did feel like a Shiva call. So there was that.
Yeah. So seeking the shelter of each other, sharing the despair. Susanna, if you've just joined, it looks like, and I don't know if you'll be able to participate through audio, but the opening question, are you there?
I am, yeah. I may participate in the beginning by audio, but then I may have to go back onto mute because I have a lot going on in the background here with the baby.
No
okay,
problem.
but hi, everyone.
Hi. So the opening question is, where do you turn for comfort when the sight of good people suffering and evil people not being held to account overwhelms you with despair?
Well, are you asking me or has everyone
Yeah.
answered already?
It's
Yeah, yeah,
it's a toss-up question, and two people have answered it already with music and nature.
I'm gonna listen a little longer.
Yeah, no
And I
problem.
may join in.
No problem.
I think,
Nancy, yes.
I don't know if comfort is the word, but maybe relief comes from one, speaking with other people who also see that pain, and two, just doing small things for other people, just like one on one, you do what you can.
These are all wonderful suggestions. I'm making my own list for tomorrow when I watch MSNBC again. Those are wonderful. Thank you.
So Rich, I was really struggling with this question, as I think a lot of us have been. And I'm sorry, I gotta say, for me, the answer is none of the above and nothing. That the enormity of all that is, I don't know that there's anything that can lift the mood except for time. And then you wake up the next day and maybe you've got a different kind of set of things in mind, and it gradually recedes. But I'm really struggling with this one.
Well, although that's a strategy, right? I mean, it's sort of turning the page, moving it to the background, and kind of, Scarlett O'Hara your way through it to another day. So I think that's a strategy. Probably most people here have used it. Claudia.
So instead of comfort, came up with two words. One is proportion, perspective. And this may sound wacky, but as a former, I still love archaeology, but I also have been reading about, the history of climate change going back millions, maybe billions of years. So this may sound wacky, but I zoom out into space, and the Earth has been going on for, billions of years, millions, dinosaur extinction 62 million years ago. So that gets me some perspective. Like, there's been a whole lot of awful stuff going on, especially in the last 12,000 years since we developed agriculture. So that's perspective. That's one place I go. And the other is, I wish I subscribed to MSNBC and I could listen to Rachel Maddow. I think being in the company of sane people who speak it out would give me, okay, thank you, accompaniment. So two things, accompaniment and perspective.
Yes. Can I ask you, those are great. Can I ask you one thing about the perspective? So when you move to astronomical time, geological time, and maybe kind of zoom out into orbit, so where does that take you? In what way is that a comfortable, how does it give you, what is the perspective that it gives you? This too shall pass?
Yeah, it's straight to this too shall pass. If Jesus couldn't stop it, Buddha couldn't stop it. We just don't have an equivalent figure of great power and goodness but nobody can stop it. It's going to be just the same. It's going to be going on when I die. So like, and it may get a hell of a lot worse before, like during the McCarthy era, it eventually got better. Will it? Since fascism looks like it's a pretty worldwide, movement at this point. Who knows?
Okay, thank you for those. Anyone else want to speak to this? Okay.
Well, I'll chime in briefly, but I turn to beautiful things that our humans have created, which are the counter to what humanity does. That's horrible. So art, music, poetry, anything that shows the incredible resilience, but also creativity of the human mind and spirit. And that it's I agree with Claudia, it's a form of perspective too. Like there's that and there's that. And that's where I go.
Thank you for that. And that echoes something that Annette said before you came on, because she goes to music and nature. Thank you for that. Any other thoughts before we go on? Okay, well, these are all kind of very resonant with where I may be going with this. Let me start, as I do, by putting us in liturgical time. So we're thinking about where we are in the calendar. So Re'eh comes at the end of this month of Tammuz and at the beginning of Elul. Elul is the month of preparation before Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and it begins this Friday night. The Sephardim, my people, recite the Slichot for the whole month to get in the proper frame of mind for high holidays. The Haftarah of Re'eh is the third of the 7 Haftarot after Tisha B'Av, the so-called Haftarot of consolation, the Sheva de Nechemta. And they mark the 7 weeks from Tisha B'Av to Rosh Hashanah. So this is a time of increasing introspection at the end of summer. So a brief overview of the Parsha. So Moses opens with this very clear-cut proposition. You can either choose the good path, obey the commandments, reap the blessings, or choose the bad path and the curses that go with it. He says that after they enter the land, they will enact this in a ritual every year, standing on 2 separate mountains, with 6 of the tribes on each mountain. And each camp will reiterate this choice. So Moses is keeping it simple, keeping it real for all time. Moses tells them that when they enter the land, they must destroy all the places of idol worship and beware of adopting the customs of the people they dispossess. They are to worship at the holy places designated by God. Jerusalem is not specifically noted, but in other places it will be. Meat is allowed to be eaten anywhere, but blood cannot be eaten. The Levites and their families must not be neglected. You have to watch out for prophets and dream diviners who might encourage idol worship. If after thorough investigation, it's discovered that a town has succumbed to idol worship, then it is to be destroyed completely, all the people, all the cattle. The laws of kashrut are enumerated. The laws of tithing are promulgated. The forgiveness of debts every 7th year and freeing of slaves every 7th year is also promulgated. If a slave wants to stay in their condition with their master, there's this strange ritual of piercing their ear on the doorpost. The firstborn of the flock are dedicated to God and to be sacrificed at the temple. And the portion concludes with the 3 holidays, the pilgrimage holidays to Jerusalem, Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. And we are commanded, particularly with respect to Sukkot, to celebrate the holidays with joy. So there's a lot included, but what I want to do is begin at the beginning. And Claudia, would you like to read for us the very first 3 sentences of the Parsha? 11:26 through 28 in English, of course.
See, this day I set before you blessing and curse. Blessing, if you obey the commandments of your God, Adonai, that I enjoin upon you this day, and curse, if you do not obey the commandments of your God, Adonai, but turn away from the path that I enjoin upon you this day and follow other gods, whom you have not, this is interesting, experienced.
Okay.
Yeah, that's,
Thank you.
oh.
Thank you. Okay, so let me start by asking for reactions to these first 3 sentences. Anything stand out for you? Questions that you have?
Pretty straightforward.
Pretty straightforward. Who suggests that it's pretty straightforward?
Nancy.
Nancy, okay. Well, I guess it is straightforward, right? It's very sort of clean cut. Well, let me ask this question about the first word, Re'eh, which is translated see. I don't know if does anyone have a different translation in their Torah, in their Chumash? Or do you all have see?
Behold.
Behold. I think that's kind of a good translate. I mean, it's sort of an attention grabbing word, right? That, but it's an unusual beginning word. And I guess I would contrast it with, there are various points where when Moses addresses the people, he begins with Shema, right? Most particularly the Shema. But there's a Torah portion called Ha'azinu, which means listen. So I'm wondering what your reaction is to the choice of the word see as opposed to the choice of the word listen. What do you think is being communicated by that choice of the word see?
I'm going to react to something else. This verse really bothers me in the sense that when bad things happen, as they will, and you read this verse, it's almost because you did something bad.
Yes. Well, so that's an
And
interesting.
if good things happen, it's because God loves me, which God, there are people that, that will, that if they get something, they'll say that's because God loves me. Trump said that.
Right. Well, that's
It's not
obviously.
Reconstructionist, this thing.
Say that again, Merle.
This is not a Reconstructionist idea in these verses.
Yeah, and I do think that we'll talk about maybe a different way to frame this, but it's certainly troubling to think about the implications of blaming the victim. If something goes wrong for people, it's because they did something wrong. It violates our sense of what we see every day, right? Which is why I began with that question of where do you go when you watch evil triumph? So it's sort of like nothing to see here, right? To say see, right? Because if you really look, then maybe this calculus doesn't work so easily. All right, so I agree with that and understand that. But I want to ask the group, see versus listen. What is the implication of the word see and what is the implication of the word listen in terms of what the speaker is doing?
Maybe I don't know. I could be completely off. But when they say here, it's you're being asked to meditate upon it, contemplate it. When it's see, we're being asked to envision it. And that's scary. It's not abstract anymore.
Okay.
So maybe it's like really trying to hit home.
So see is making it tangible, more real.
More
than-
real.
than here.
Maybe, yeah. It's not like a lesson anymore. I
Okay.
mean, here should be enough, but maybe Moshe at this point, it's not enough.
So C's taking it to another level.
He takes it to a different level to envision it.
Uh-huh. Okay. Yes, Annette.
See feels much more active to me. Here feels passive. Here feels like you're taking something in. But see, as Naomi said, is you have to envision something. And it's much more concrete. It's much more definitive. And it's certainly much different than behold. Somehow it requires one to engage oneself in a way that I don't think here or behold does. See requires you to imagine, look,
Yeah.
really conjure up. I mean, I have this image of I'm following the commandments. I can see myself following the commandments and getting blessed, or not following the commandments and getting cursed. Whereas if I'm listening, I'm feeling much more passive about it. And if I'm beholding, I don't really know what that means.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm
So
going to say something that's not correct, but when I read see, it makes me think that this is the written word.
Hmm.
You know,
Right.
So you see something that's written down. Look, it says it right here. But we know that at this point, it wasn't written down.
Right. But there is something potentially more authoritative about C. I mean, it's sort of in the vein that other folks are saying. And it's interesting that there seems to be a consensus that C is maybe a more vivid term. I'll tell you how I hear it, see it. For me, here, and I'm influenced by Shema Yisrael, it's a declaration, and it's more consistent with a command to hear Shema, listen you. Whereas C is you're putting a proposition before people for evaluation. And I feel like it's a little bit less of a command, even though what follows, I think, is traditionally interpreted as a command. Follow the commandments or else you'll be punished. And I don't know if anyone else hears it that way, but Re'eh actually is just a slight bit kind of softer and leaving it open to response. Whereas listen is, when you turn to your kid and say, listen, you're not looking for debate. Claudia.
Well, I did two things. One is I just dropped out the Re'eh, and like, what if it wasn't there? And he just said, this a day I set before you. That was interesting. But then I've been looking at the Hebrew and looking at alternate translations, and it's Anachi Notain, which in my translation is I set before you, Lefanechem. But Notain just means give. So to go with you, I'm giving something, but are you going to take it? And he gives some pretty profound motivations. You do, good things are happening. I mean, it's primitive, but remember, this was a more primitive, concrete time, but it's still, you're giving, and it does require a taker. And then the other thing, again, that he appeals at the very end, the word experience that's translated as experience is the verb to know, other gods that you have, who you have not known. So experience. So again, he's pushing the motivation here, and before he gets into the content.
Right.
And so he's not 100% sure that the Israelites are going to sign on for this one.
Right.
So anyway, those are just some thoughts.
Okay, I appreciate that. And by the way, he certainly is not 100% sure, as we'll talk about. I mean, he's got all sorts of things set up about destroying the people you're dispossessing to avoid the temptation. So I think he's very nervous about whether the people will follow.
It's a cultural genocide he's asking for.
Yes, it definitely is.
To use today's lingo.
Yeah, and one of these times we're going to go through a discussion of harsh passages in the Torah and how to deal with them, because they are, the destroying of the town of idolaters is obviously a very difficult passage. Let me move us on because I want to talk about the second word. We talked about the first word. Let's go to the second word. We'll slowly make our way through it. Anochi, and I'm just wondering, ani would be I, so behold I, or see I, set before you today, but he uses the word anochi, and I'm wondering whether that word is resonant for anyone from another place.
The 10 Commandments?
The 10 Commandments. I mean, that is God's voice saying, I am the Lord your God. So I just think rhetorically, Moses is asking or weighting his words by the use of that word. Another thing I want to point out here in this first sentence, Re'eh Anochi Notain. So Re'eh is singular. It is the imperative singular. I want you, right? If you were to do it grammatically in Hebrew to the plural, it would be Re'u. So this is Re'eh, but then it says Re'eh Anochi Notain Lifnechem, and that is the plural.
Plural.
So what do you make of this individual verb and this plural, I don't know what it is, object, whatever, placed before you?
Saying each of you have to listen to what he's individualizing it as part of the group. As individuals, you have to do it, which makes up all of you.
Yeah, so you're saying it's incumbent upon each individual because it's the individuals who act.
Correct.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. We are a group of individuals, and it comes down to individual responsibility. There's a very nice drash by a rabbi called the Kli Yakar. Look, I place before you today. See is singular, before you is plural. This is what our sages teach us. A person must always view things as if the entire world is half righteous and half wicked. If he performs a single mitzvah, he tips himself and the entire world to the side of merit. Therefore, Moshe spoke to every individual. See that he should see in his thought that every single action affects all of them. So Merle, I think that's you. That's Reb Merle.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's what I'm saying.
yes. So good. You're in good company. So let's go back to these sentences. There's one word that's repeated over and over. It actually appears in each of the three sentences. In English, it's two words. Do you see what that word is?
Obey.
What's that?
Obey is there all over.
Is obey in each of them? See, it's not in verse 1.
No, okay, sorry. Blessing if you obey the command. Blessing.
The word hayom, this day, appears 3 times. I'm wondering, anybody have any thoughts on that? Why is that word so emphasized?
What day was it?
What day was it? That's a good question. It's this is somewhere about 5 weeks before Moses died, which I think is traditionally Adar, somewhere in Adar. So it was a month before Purim, give or take, but I don't know what day it was.
Okay.
Yeah,
You have to do it every day.
you have to do it every day,
Yeah,
right? I mean, this is in fact, maybe even a moment to moment,
yeah.
right? So that's the vision that's laid out. There's some rabbis who looked at Hayom to say that in the current world, there's blessing and curse, but in the world to come, there's just blessing. Well, I just have to say that's the kind of thing that just kind of interpretation really bugs me, because I'm interested in, because I'm not sure about the world to come. I know about this world. So those kinds of interpretations are difficult for me. And maybe we'll talk about that later.
But I also think Moses is saying there's no time to waste. It has to start now. You can't, don't tell me you're going to do it next month or tomorrow or whatever. It's right now.
That's wonderful. Urgency. It's incumbent on us to get cracking and no procrastination. Right. I like that. Very true. Anything else before we move on? Okay. This next stretch, I just want to kind of generally kind of knit it together to say that I think this is going back, and I think maybe it was Claudia was saying that Moses has some worry about whether the people are going to, in fact, follow this. And so there are a bunch of things about avoiding the temptation of other beliefs. And, so for example, in Deuteronomy 12, 5-7, Ken, do you want to read those verses?
But look only to the site that your God will choose amidst all of your tribes as God's habitation, to establish the divine name there. There you are to go, And there you are to bring your burnt offerings and other sacrifices, your tithes and contributions, your votive and free will offerings, and the firstlings of your herds and flocks. Together with your households, you shall feast there before your God Adonai, happy in all the undertakings to which your God Adonai has blessed you.
I highlighted those verses only to say that this separation that comes from separate worship, and there's a lot of separate worship here in this parsha, is basically to keep people away from temptation, keep them in their pod, in their community, and that is a big theme of this parsha, to sort of enforce fidelity. There's a verse earlier in the prior parsha that talks about the commandment to destroy. And this was in chapter 7, verse 16. You shall destroy all the peoples that your God Adonai delivers to you, showing them no pity. You shall not worship their gods, for that would be a snare to you. Take a look at the first word in Hebrew that is translated, you shall destroy. See that word? Yeah, Claudia.
Holy smokes. I mean, la'achol, to eat?
To eat. Isn't that an amazing word? I mean, to me, there is that word. I mean, that word choice is sort of like, you are what you eat. Like, ingesting them is the risk that you will be influenced by them. Right? I mean,
but isn't Eretz Achelet Yoshvecha? Isn't that what the spy said? It's a line that eats its.
Yes. I
Eretz
think that's
Achelet.
right.
It's using the same verb.
And does it use ochel there? That sounds right.
I think
That beats
so.
it to the evidence.
Eretz
Yeah,
Achelet Yoshvecha.
that's an interesting connection. That's an interesting
Well, it's
connection.
like consume. It will
Yeah.
be consumed means eaten up,
Yeah,
which is a way to say destroy.
right.
It
But,
also, it reminds me of when the golden calf, when Moshe came down the mountain, he saw the people had built the golden calf. And my son leaned over because he had gone to the Rashi school, and he leaned over to me and he started to say, and the rabbi said, does anyone remember what happened after they burnt the golden calf? They melted down the golden calf. And my son leaned over to me and he whispered, he made them eat it. And I wasn't familiar with that verse. And I said, what? But I mean, it's very visceral, it's the same thing. It's like you eat your sins, or maybe because it's so repellent to you, I'm going to force you to do something so repellent you won't ever want to do it again.
Sure.
Yes.
I know this girl, and I met, her father was a smoker and always wished he could quit and didn't. And then he saw he realized his daughter was sneaking. This is when I was in camp, and he realized his daughter was sneaking cigarettes. And he sat down with her at the kitchen table and he had her eat. I'll never forget this because it sounds like child abuse, but it's a long time ago. He had her eat like a whole bunch of cigarettes until she threw up.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And he said, you ever gonna smoke? And she said, no.
Oh,
And,
yes, that sounds like child abuse. But
it sounds like child abuse to me.
yeah, no, I hear you. It's like angry, step parent, and I should be careful to use that, but it's like the old fairy tales of really, the horrific parentified figure of Moses making them eat the golden calf. So I want to move us on here to something else. So we've got kashrut, which is another area of separation, right? And this theme of trying to keep people in their community, in a separate community. Obviously, kashrut does that because one of the ways that you kind of have communion with people is to break bread with them. And if you create a separate set of dietary laws, that's a kind of a whole area of social interaction that becomes a little bit more difficult. And it's also metaphorical for the separation of the Jewish people. The other thing that I found interesting that thematically, it kind of makes sense that it's included in the Parsha is this, the sentences, the sections that deal with the seventh year, the Shemitah year, the forgiving of the debts, and the freeing of slaves. And it's interesting to me that, because it's almost like an internal contradiction with the first sentence, right? That if it really were the case that, the good were rewarded, et cetera, and that the moral calculus was so good, there might not be a need for the Shemitah year. But, there's some acknowledgement, right, that there's, there are unequal outcomes, and there's sort of a leveling of the playing field that occurs every 7 years to kind of do a reset. So I thought that was interesting.
And it's also nice that today Biden is giving up on the student loans. He's removing student loans as we read this.
Yes, it's his own personal Shemitah.
What
Yeah,
is he giving up?
the student loans. have been
Oh, the
moved.
student loans, yeah.
What is it, up to 10,000 per
Yeah.
student?
Up to 20 for some.
Is it up to 20 for some?
It depends on their income.
Right?
And he
Yeah.
also extended it, right? The period of not having to pay, he extended it by a few months.
Did he? That's good.
Yeah.
The moratorium on.
Maybe he read this, Parsha.
I did ship it to him via email, so that could have
Okay.
helped. So one thing I wanted to point out on this issue of blessing and curse and separation, and that is something that I hadn't really focused on from Bamidbar, which was Bilam's speech. And everybody knows Bilam's speech as Ma Tovu, right? But there's also another very famous saying that Bilam says in looking out over the Israelites. Does anybody remember? He pronounces something about the Jewish people in looking at them.
How goodly are your tents, O Israel, your dwellings, O Jacob.
That's the Ma Tovu that everybody knows. There's one other thing, and I'll share the screen. And let's see if I can find it. There it is. Numbers 23:9. Nomi, you want to read that?
As I see them from the mountaintops, gaze on them from the heights. There is a people that dwells apart, not reckoned among nations.
Well, it's up for time.
It's a pot. We're a pot. I like what Rich, what you said a few minutes ago about being a pod, because we certainly became familiar with the idea of a family or a social pod
Yeah.
in the last 2.5 years. And hopefully it worked for those people in those pods. And it sounds it's I know how it can sound. It can sound like you're being exclusive and you're looking down on others, and I'm only going to be a part of my people and nobody else's. But I think but I do understand it. And how the idea of the pod come COVID times was self-protection.
Right.
And the laws that Moshe has given, it's like literally the Vayikra, and it's like that. It's all how to have a just and moral society.
Right.
So the idea of, that to envision the worst, that the worst can happen, but the pod is a place of protection, and it's not a matter of higher status than others. It's a matter of a few people have called it particularism, and it's like I'm greater among the world, but I have a Jewish home.
Right.
And it's where I have mezuzot. It's a Jewish home, and that can't be compromised.
Right.
So
Thank you. Merle.
Looking at this and thinking, it's almost like blueprint for the people who have persecuted the Jews through the ages. they're, the reason they were kicked out of Israel, the reason we were kicked out of Israel is we were bad. And we must be doing something bad because we're having such a hard life and living apart in the ghettos. It's almost like foretelling or
Yeah,
using this as justification for what happened to us.
yeah. Well, you know, and I agree that there's a sort of eerie resonance to it. But also, you know, this whole notion of Am Levadad Yishkon, people that dwell apart, is that a blessing or a curse?
That's
mean,
what
just-
I don't know.
Right? It's both.
I don't know.
I,
And
I- yeah.
I don't know, because it's also like we're put as outcasts. But then again, you know, there's something in there that I find I'm grappling with it, you know. We have to have an Israel because we need a place. There's so much that I'm grappling with that,
Yeah,
what it means. The other thing that I'm picking up from this is what the rabbis did, because in here, it's saying that we shouldn't be doing anything outside of unless it was the place where we were designated by God. And here we are scattered all over the world. And the rabbis have made it possible for us to hold on to our beliefs by not following this.
right. And there was a little bit of a contradictory strain in the Parsha in that you can eat meat and sacrifice it in some of the kind of holy places that weren't necessarily Jerusalem. It was the 3 holidays that had to be in Jerusalem. But, you know, I agree with you. There's you know, I view it as kind of the blessing side of the pod, right? The separation kept us alive, and here we are discussing, you know, Torah thousands of years later. But on the other hand, it did create, you know, the ghetto in a way, you know, where we separated ourselves, made ourselves the other, and you know, became the object of suspicion and hatred, maybe because of that too. So, you know, I guess about a month ago, we talked about how things that may ostensibly seem bad may have their silver lining. And so the whole blessing curse dichotomy is itself a little bit of a false dichotomy, because it can be hard to winnow out, you know, whether something is a blessing or a curse. I want to move us to one other concept at the end, and then sort of twist it around a little bit. So the concept at the end is this concept of joy and simcha and happiness. Who has not read yet? Nancy, have you read yet?
Not yet.
Well, can we ask you to read 16
Yep.
verses 11 through 15?
Great. You shall rejoice before your God Adonai with your son and daughter, your male and your female slave, the family of the Levite in your communities, and the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow in your midst, at the place where your God Adonai will choose to establish the divine name. Bear in mind that you were slaves in Egypt, and take care to obey these laws. After the ingathering from your threshing floor and your vat, you shall hold the feast of booths for 7 days. You shall rejoice in your festival with your son and daughter, your male and female slave, the family of the Levite, the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow in your communities. You shall hold a festival for your God Adonai 7 days in the place that Adonai will choose. For your God Adonai will bless all your crops and all your undertakings, and you shall have nothing but joy.
Okay, there's a lovely little image. You know, when we were talking earlier about refuge and respite, I was wondering if anyone would say family. I don't think anyone said family. We do have, I think, Susanna on maybe grandma duty. So maybe that's present. But that's certainly an area of of respite and comfort. And I find it really interesting that that there's this emphasis on the joy of family and the joy of celebration. But it's not just family, right? If you look at verse 14, you rejoice in the festival with your slaves, not just your family, your slaves, the Levites, the stranger, the fatherless, the widow. So this is a comprehensive, full community ingathering of happiness and joy. And I feel like that's sort of a bookend, because this is the very end of the portion. It's sort of a bookend with the beginning. So now I'm going to turn this around in a way that you will either say, oh, that's interesting, or, oh, that's BS. But anyway, here we go. So the other tradition I spend a lot of time studying is Buddhism. And to me, I feel like this very beginning of I place before you the blessing and the curse, to me, really resonates with the concept of the Four Noble Truths, because the curse is suffering. So I just wanted to lay out the basics of Buddhist theology, and I think they actually map in a very interesting way to Re'eh. So the Four Noble Truths are that there's suffering, which is endemic. The Pali word for that is dukkha. And I've heard that translated as reactivity. It's either you want more of an experience or less, but there's no satisfaction, as Mick Jagger told us. The truth of the cause of suffering is this craving. The truth of the end of suffering is that you can end it by renouncing craving. And that the fourth truth is that there's a path that frees us from suffering, which is the Eightfold Path. The Eightfold Path, so the Buddhists were really into listicles, I think, mostly as a mnemonic device, because it was like Torah, an oral tradition. But there are all these sort of commandments: right view, right understanding, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. And there are sort of details unpacking those concepts a little bit. And so to the extent that the opening words of Moses are to say, I understand that it's endemic that there are kind of curses in the world. The Jewish flip on this to talk, the language that Merle was saying that, found disturbing, that, while there is some agency that, hey, maybe you can make the outcome good by being a good person and following the commandments, there's blaming the victim. If things aren't going so well, it's because you screwed up. The Buddhist take on that is that there is suffering in the world, and the way to alleviate it is hayom, this day, this moment. Your next action has to be in accordance with the Eightfold Path, and that's basically following commandments. The other thing that's interesting, just in terms of how this parsha maps onto Buddhist theology, is that there's two basic streams of meditation, one being the emptiness practice, which is that all thought is activity of mind and an illusion, and what's left is love and interconnectedness of everything. To me, the final portion that we just read about joy and community is love and interconnection, and that is the place of respite and comfort that exists amidst all of that. The other strain of Buddhist meditation is you just go straight to loving kindness, metta meditations. That metta, not metta as an above, but metta, the Pali word for, I think it's compassion. So anyway, I don't know if you buy that or not, but I read this in the sort of, I guess, not traditional Orthodox framing of it, but gives me comfort in reading this, is to not go to this artificial, it's blessing and curses with automatic reward and retribution, depending which path you choose, but rather that it's incumbent on me to figure out, in light of the choices that I have, to choose either the good path or the bad path, to choose the good path in each moment.
It's, you know, it's when we do the Shema, there's the two selections. The traditional one and the Reconstructionist one. And the traditional one is really mimicking this.
Right.
The Manya Buya, you know, that your days be long and whatever.
Right.
And the Reconstructionists have sort of, they put that in, gave us an alternative.
So it's interesting because the Reconstructionist Siddur that we used to use back in the day, I think it's the Sim Shalom, has a footnote to the second paragraph of the Shema that says, you know, you could read this metaphorically, that if you do good deeds, then good deeds will come to you. It's not so much that your agricultural, you know, yield will be that much higher, but your spiritual yield will be higher. And Merle, do you remember what the alternate second paragraph of the Shema is in the Reconstructionist Siddur?
I'm not
What's the theme
remembering
there?
it right now.
Yeah, I'll have to look that up.
Yeah,
So what do you buy this sort of Buddhist slant on Re'eh, or am I drinking the happy juice?
Could give you my thoughts.
Please.
Well, I mean, my feeling about the difference between Judaism and Buddhism is that Buddhism basically says all life is suffering and basically get out as fast as you can, you know, not, but you know, you want to escape the cycle of birth and rebirth, and you want to go to nirvana. Whereas in Judaism, yes, there's suffering, but there's also happiness on earth amongst men.
Right.
That was always actually my complaint against Buddhism. It's like, not everything is suffering. There's actually some nice things.
Yeah. Well, I think Buddhism is a path to escape suffering, not necessarily by reincarnation solely, but by, you know, reaching, hopefully, enlightenment, or getting as close as you can. But Claudia, are you?
Well, I following on what Nancy said, I mean, I've been believed ever since I've heard attachment, you know, let go of attachments as clinging. But I'm very interested in what you put at the end after you understand that all thought is an activity of mind and illusion. What is left is love and the interconnected of everything. And I haven't heard Buddhists talk about that particularly, and I don't sound like Nancy hasn't either. So I wondered if you wanted to say more about, I mean, are those derived from your learnings, Rich?
Yeah.
Your Buddhist study?
Yeah. There is a sense that there's kind of an innate core of loving kindness, that there is no self. Self is an illusion, but there's this core of loving kindness that does exist, that is sort of a shared energy force that you're tied to. I guess, you know, for one of a better. And there are school of Buddhist meditation, this metta meditation that just goes right to that core of loving kindness and tries to bestow it upon yourself, upon, you know, various degrees of, you know, sort of comfort, until, you know, the point of that meditation is to sort of realize that the separation that you may nominally feel between you and the other is a construction. Or at least that's some learning that I've come to in my studies of it. You know, Nancy, you had like on the sort of Buddhism is, you know, I mean, there's Chinese Buddhism, but you had told me recently the story of the Chinese person and the Jewish person talking about the relative antiquity of their civilizations that you might want to share for this group.
I think you might be able to share it.
You want me to share it?
You share, yeah.
Well, this is, but giving attribution where it belongs, I heard this from Nancy, which was a Jewish person and a Chinese person were talking about their relative religions and learnings. And the Chinese person was saying, well, our civilization is 4,000 years old. And the Jewish person says, well, our civilization is 5,000 years old. And the Chinese person says, well, what did you eat for the first 1,000 years?
And we didn't do with Chinese food, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, I
Anyway,
remember being at the terracotta soldiers, and those supposedly were done 5,000 years ago. And I thought that's 3,000 years before Christ. That was a hell of a. Hmm?
2,200 years ago.
Terracotta?
Yeah,
Okay.
221 BC. E.
well, anyway, so just I'll conclude to say that I hope we all find the blessings in our lives, remain connected to that core of loving kindness that's at the heart of our being and there to be accessed at all times. And in the words of this portion, the hayita ach sameach, you should know nothing but joy. We have 9 people, but Judy, are you saying Kaddish? You're on mute.
I can say Kaddish, yes.
So Rabbi Pensner shared with me a Kaddish for less than 10.
Okay.
I don't know how it goes. I've never used it before. So
Larry's here. He'll join in.
will Larry be the 10th?
He could be the 10th,
Wonderful.
and Naomi too. Yeah, we got 10.
All right, hold on one second. So thank Larry for pinch hitting. And I'll invite everybody to unmute and respond as Judy recites it. And anyone else, is anyone else saying Kaddish tonight? Okay, go ahead, Judy.
Okay. Yikadal v'yikadash shemei
Dash,
v'yama di
Right.
v'rutei v'yamutei v'chayikon v'yomachon v'yadigal beit Yisrael v'agla uzman kari v'imru amen.
Amen. Yehesh me rabba amen.
Barak v'yishtabak v'yipar v'ramam v'naseh v'yitadar v'yitalel v'yitalal shemei dekudusha b'rich.
Richu.
Leila minko bekata b'shirata tush bekata v'nechamata amiram b'yama v'imru amen.
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 Yeh shama rabba min shemaya v'ayim aleinu v'yakal Yisrael v'imru amen.
Amen.
Say shalom v'romav hu yaseh shalom aleinu v'yakal Yisrael v'yakal Yoshvei tevel v'imru amen.
Amen.
All right. Well, everyone, thank you for joining this evening. I really enjoyed the discussion and hearing people's take on what can be a really complicated Parsha.
Thank you. for-
Yasher koach.
Here.
Nice.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot.
Okay,
Erev tov.
Yeah. Erev Tov. Have a good night.
Oh, all of you.
Bye-bye.
right.